Nobody's coming for you, kid. That's just how the world works. He'd heard those words so many times they'd stopped stinging. But that night, crouched in the dark beside a rusted van in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, Ethan Walker heard something that made every single one of those words feel like a lie. A chain, dragging across metal. Something alive was in there. And for the first time in his 20 years of running, Ethan Walker stopped. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part to the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The chain sound came again. Ethan pressed himself flat against the side of the van, his heart slamming so hard against his ribs he was sure whoever was inside could hear it. He hadn't moved in 40 seconds. He counted. 41, 42. The Nevada desert at 2 in the morning was the kind of cold that didn't just get into your coat. It got into your bones, your teeth, the space behind your eyes. He'd been living in it for 3 weeks, sleeping under whatever cover he could find, eating whatever gas stations threw out, moving the way a hunted animal moves, always toward the next shadow, never looking back. He'd found the scrapyard by accident. Or maybe desperation looks enough like accident that the two become the same thing. He'd been following the outer edge of Route 93 far enough from the road that truckers wouldn't spot him in their headlights, close enough that he could read the mile markers and know where he was. The scrapyard had appeared through the dark like a cemetery of machines, towers of crushed cars stacked 4 and 5 high, rusted agriculture equipment, lying on its side like dead giants. Entire pickup trucks, reduced to nothing but chassis and emptiness. He'd been looking for a dry place to sleep. That was all. He'd crawled under a flatbed truck first, but the ground was too wet, and something had nested in the wheel well, and he hadn't wanted to find out what. He'd tried a crushed Buick next, but the door wouldn't open far enough. Then he'd moved deeper into the yard, past a row of school bus frames, past what looked like the skeleton of a boat, and that's when he'd seen the cargo van. It was parked, not crushed, not stacked, just sitting between 2 walls of compressed metal, like it had pulled in and never left. The kind of van that hauled equipment, or produce, or in another decade a family's furniture from one coast to the other. White once. Now it was the gray of old snow. The back doors faced him. One of them hung open about 4 inches, held there by something Ethan couldn't see. He'd been moving toward it because it was shelter. That was the whole calculation. Nothing more complicated than that. And then the chain moved. He stopped. He listened. In the desert at night, silence isn't actually silence. There's wind. There's the tick of cooling metal. There are animals you can't name making sounds you can't place. Ethan had learned to read all of it over the past 3 weeks. He knew the difference between a coyote settling into grass and a person shifting their weight. What he heard was a person shifting their weight. The chain dragged again, short, controlled, like someone trying to move without making noise and failing by exactly 1 link. Ethan's first instinct was what his first instinct always was. Leave. Walk away. This is not your problem, and you don't have enough left in you to make it your problem. He had $17 and some change in his right boot, a lighter half a granola bar, and a jacket with 1 pocket that didn't close. He was 20 years old and he hadn't slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 11 days. His left shoulder still hurt from where a man at a truck stop in Elko had grabbed him hard enough to leave a bruise the shape of a handprint. Leave, Ethan. Just leave. He didn't leave. He moved around to the back of the van, instead his boots finding the ground quietly, the way they'd learned to do in the 7 years he'd spent moving through spaces where he wasn't wanted. He reached the open door, put his fingers against it, pushed it the rest of the way. The smell hit him first, not rot, not death, just the closed-up smell of a space that hadn't breathed in days. Sweat, something metallic, the particular stale quality of air that has been recycled too many times by lungs that are running out of patience. He couldn't see much. Some ambient light from somewhere in the yard, enough to catch shapes, but not enough to read them. He pulled out his lighter, clicked it once, held it up. She was in the back corner. She was sitting on the van floor with his back against the wheel, knees pulled up partway, and 1 arm extended to her left, because that was as far as the chain allowed. The chain connected a cuff around her right wrist to a bolt ring in the van floor. Heavy chain, the kind you'd use to secure equipment. The cuff wasn't padded, he could see that much. She was young, early 20s maybe, dark hair that had dried in every direction. She was wearing jeans, one boot, and a leather vest over a torn thermal shirt. The vest was black with patches on it that he couldn't read in the lighter small flame. Her face was turned towards him, and even in that thin flickering light, he could see the cut in above her left eye and the bruising that had spread from it across her temple. And her eyes. Her eyes were the thing. They weren't scared the way he expected. They weren't begging. They were calculating, running some kind of fast and furious assessment of him, cataloging everything he was in the time it took him to take one breath. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and controlled and absolutely serious. Get out of here, right now. Don't ask me anything. Don't touch anything. Just go. Ethan didn't move. I said go. She said it the way you say something to someone who still has time. You don't understand what you walked into. You're chained to the floor, Ethan said. I know I'm chained to the floor. I can feel it. Her jaw tightened. How old are you? 20. Something moved through her expression, not quite pity, something harder than pity. Then you're old enough to understand me when I tell you that the people who put me here will kill you for being in this van. How long have you been here? That's not a question you should be asking me. How long? She looked at him for a moment longer. Then quietly, 3 days. 3 days. Ethan's lighter was getting hot against his thumb. He clicked it off, stood in the dark with what he'd just heard settling into him. 3 days in a chain, no food probably. Limited water maybe. And whatever had been done to put that cut above her eye that had happened before she'd been put here or during, and nobody had cleaned it. I'm going to get you out, he said. No, you're not. Her voice didn't rise. It got flatter, which was somehow worse. You're going to leave. You're going to walk out of this yard and get back on whatever road you were on, and you're going to keep walking until you're far enough away that none of this can touch you. Is the bolt ring welded to the floor or bolted? A pause. You're not listening to me. I'm listening to everything you're saying, Ethan told her. Is the bolt ring welded or bolted? Silence. Then, like she'd made a decision, she wasn't entirely at peace with bolted, but it's sunk deep, and the chain is heavy gauge. You don't have tools. There's a whole scrapyard out there. They'll come back. When, I don't know, they haven't kept a schedule. A pause. Morning, maybe. They've come in the morning both times. Ethan clicked the lighter again. Checked his phone, no signal, but the clock read 2:14 a.m. He looked at the bolt ring, looked at the chain, looked at the cuff. Tell me your name, he said. She hesitated, like the name itself was a piece of information she wasn't sure she should hand over. Then Chloe. I'm Ethan. I'm going to find something in that yard. Don't make noise if you can help it. You don't know what you're doing, she said. I never do, he said. Doesn't usually stop me. He dropped out of the van before she could answer. The scrapyard at 2 in the morning was its own kind of wilderness. Ethan moved through it the way he moved through everything, fast, slow, using his hands as much as his eyes when the light failed him. He was looking for specific things. A pry bar ideally, a wrench that could fit a large bolt head, a hammer, a crowbar, something with leverage, something with force, something that could convince a deep-sunk bolt that it no longer wanted to be where it was. The first aisle of crushed cars gave him nothing useful. The second gave him a socket wrench that had lost its handle and wasn't going to be much good to anyone. He moved deeper. Between a collapsed pickup and what had been a delivery vehicle, he found a pile of equipment that had been dumped rather than organized. Old axles, a floor jack with a broken arm, a chain binder, some kind of agricultural implement he couldn't name. He sorted through it with his hands moving pieces aside carefully to avoid noise. His fingers found a crowbar. Not big, maybe 18 inches, but solid. Real steel, not hollow. He picked it up and felt the weight of it and thought that it was going to have to be enough. He also found a socket set, half the sockets missing, but the ratchet handle was intact and the half-inch drive was still functional. He checked the sockets, found a 1-inch that looked like it might work. He went back. Chloe had shifted position while he was gone. She was watching the door when he climbed back in, and there was something in the tightness of her shoulders that told him she'd spent his absence deciding whether he was coming back. Found a crowbar and a socket wrench, he said. The bolt head is 32 millimeter, she said. He checked the socket, too small. 1 inch is 25/4. It won't fit. I know. He looked at the bolt ring for a moment. What does the ring connect to underneath the floor panel? Chloe shifted so she could look at it from her angle. I don't know. I can't see under the panel. Can you feel it? Is it solid when you pull? She wrapped her free hand around the chain close to the ring and pulled. Solid. Okay. Ethan crouched down beside the ring, stuck the end of the crowbar under the edge of the floor panel next to the bolt, and pushed down slowly. The panel groaned. He stopped, listened, pushed again. You're going to make too much noise, Chloe said. I know. Tell me if you hear a vehicle. Ethan, tell me if you hear a vehicle. He pushed harder. The panel separated from the floor frame with a sound that felt in that silence, approximately as loud as a gunshot. Both of them froze. Nothing. No engine, no footsteps. Nothing but the desert and the metal ticking around them. He peeled back the floor panel. Underneath was the subframe, and the bolt that held the ring ran through a thick steel plate that was welded to the frame itself. Not going anywhere by force, not with what he had. He looked at it for 10 seconds. Then he looked at the chain. The chain connected to the ring via a padlock. Standard shackle padlock, the kind that showed up on storage units and fence gates all over the country. He looked at the shackle. The lock, he said. What about it? If I can get the crowbar behind the shackle and use the floor plate as a fulcrum, he was already positioning it, working the flat end of the crowbar behind the shackle loop, pressing it against the plate. The shackle is hardened, but the body of the lock might not be. If I can apply enough lateral, you're going to break your crowbar before you break that lock. Maybe. He pushed. The crowbar bent slightly and nothing else moved. He repositioned, tried a different angle. The shackle groaned, actually groaned a metallic sound like something in genuine distress. He pushed harder. Chloe was watching him work in a way that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite doubt. Something suspended between the two. Why are you doing this? She said. Working on it, he said through clenched teeth. I'm serious. You don't know me. I don't know most people. He repositioned again. Doesn't mean I can leave them chained to a floor. A lot of people would. I know. Another push. The lock body shifted, not broke, shifted. He felt it. The shackle was bowing, the body warping under lateral stress that it wasn't designed for. What happened to you? Chloe said. Before tonight, I mean. This isn't a conversation for right now. I've been in this van for 3 days. I need it to be a conversation for right now. Ethan glanced at her. Her eyes were steady, serious, like she was asking him not to be polite about it. Foster care, he said, 8 placements, aged out at 18, which means they gave me a garbage bag with my stuff in it and a bus ticket to whatever city they decided I should go to, and that was it. And since then, moving. He pushed again. The lock body bent further, just moving. How long? 2 years. She was quiet for a moment. Then that vest I'm wearing. He glanced at it. Yeah, you see the patches. He'd clocked them in the lighter's first flash, but hadn't had context for them. He looked now more carefully. A center patch. A logo he didn't recognize clearly in the low light. Rocker patches above and below. Chapter name, club name. Hell's Angels, he said. My father's a senior member of the Oakland chapter. She said it the way you say something that explains a great many things at once. His name is Marcus Anderson. People call him Grizzly. This vest is his. He gave it to me when I was 19, and he said if I ever wore it, anyone in the club would recognize it and help me. Ethan sat back on his heels. The lock was almost there. He could feel it. And it didn't help. The people who grabbed me were waiting. They knew what I looked like. They waited until I was alone. Her jaw tightened. They took the vest off me and put it back on me after because they wanted my father to know they weren't afraid of it. Why'd they grab you? To pressure him. There are people trying to take over a series of local businesses in the East Bay, protection money basically with violence behind it if you don't pay. My father's chapter has been making it difficult for them, so they decided to take something my father valued. Ethan looked at her. You. Me. She said it without self-pity, as a fact. He turned back to the lock and pushed with everything he had left. Something cracked, not the crowbar, something inside the lock. Body and the shackle twisted and then pulled through the warped housing and the chain dropped. The sound it made hitting the van floor was the best sound Ethan Walker had heard in 2 years. Chloe looked at her wrist. The cuff was still there. He hadn't been able to get to that, but the chain was free dragging from it, and she was no longer anchored to the floor. She looked at him. He looked back. Something moved through her face that wasn't a word and didn't need to be. Can you walk? He said. Yes. She tested her legs, shifting her weight. Winced once, controlled it. I might be slow. We'll figure it out. He moved to the door, checked outside, nothing. We need to put distance between us and this yard before it gets light. Your father, how would we reach him? My phone is gone. They took it. She climbed towards the door, moving carefully but moving. If we can get to a working phone, anywhere I know a number, his road captain's number, he'd get word to my father inside of an hour. Okay. Ethan dropped out of the van, first turned, helped her down. Her feet hit the gravel and she steadied herself, one hand briefly on his arm. Ethan. She said his name like she was making a note of it, storing it. Yeah. They will come back here in the morning and find this when they figure out I'm gone. I know. They're dangerous people. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment in the cold dark. You're not scared. I thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm scared, he said. I'm just more scared of leaving you in there. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she nodded once and they turned away from the van and moved into the dark together. The desert between the scrapyard and anything Ethan would call civilization was not small. It was the kind of empty that felt deliberate, like the land itself had made a decision about what it wanted to be and committed fully to it. No streetlights, no farmhouses, no traffic sounds beyond the occasional distant hum of trucks on the far highway, too far to flag, too far to reach quickly. They moved west and slightly north. Ethan had a rough sense of direction from the stars and from the week he'd spent in this general stretch of desert, and he knew there was a diner and a cluster of buildings about 4 miles out. He'd eaten there 2 days ago, or tried to, before the owner had spotted him and made it clear he wasn't the paying kind of customer they were after. He hadn't minded. He'd gotten a cup of water and a look at the road layout before he left. And right now, that was worth more than a meal would have been. Chloe matched his pace for the first mile without complaint. She was limping not badly but consistently, and he could tell she was managing pain rather than being free of it. The cold was working against them both. Her jacket was inadequate for the desert at night, and she'd lost a boot somewhere and wouldn't tell him how. Tell me about your father, Ethan said. Not to make conversation, because he needed to understand what they were walking toward as much as what they were walking away from. What do you want to know? The people who grabbed you, they thought pressuring him through you would work, which means they think he cares about you more than he cares about the fight. They're right about that, she said. He'd give up anything for me. He's made that clear since I was old enough to understand it. But you're not going to let him. She glanced at him sideways. No. So when we reach him, the conversation is about what happens to the people who did this, not about my father backing down. Her voice was even, not angry, certain. I grew up around this, Ethan. I know how it works. You show weakness to people like this. They don't take what you offered them. They take everything. Ethan absorbed that, kept walking. What does he know right now about you being gone? Everything and nothing. He knows I was taken. I didn't disappear quietly. There was a scene. He knows who's responsible. What he doesn't know is where I was or whether I'm alive. A pause. 3 days. He's been 3 days not knowing. Ethan thought about 3 days of not knowing. He thought about what that did to a person. He thought about Marcus Anderson, whoever he was, sitting somewhere with that knowledge and being unable to act on it precisely because the people who had his daughter were counting on what acting would cost her. He'll have people looking, Ethan said. He'll have 100 people looking, maybe more. Her voice was quiet. They just didn't know where to look. Ethan looked up at the stars for a moment. You said people call him Grizzly. Since before I was born. Why? Something small and complicated moved across her face, like the question touched something that had texture to it. Because he's big and he's loud and he can be terrifying when he needs to be. That's what people see. She paused. But grizzlies are also, there's a thing about grizzlies that people forget. They're intensely protective of family. Intensely, to a degree that most animals aren't. You get between a grizzly and what she loves. She stopped herself, adjusted. It's not just the anger, it's the depth of it. Ethan nodded, kept walking. He's not what people think, Chloe said, and there was something underneath it that wasn't defensive. It was the particular tone of someone who has spent years watching the world see the wrong thing. The stories about Hell's Angels, some of them are true and a lot of them aren't, and even the ones that are true are only part of a picture. My father he's helped people. Quietly. families who were going to lose their houses, kids who were aging out of the system and had nowhere. She stopped. She stopped because Ethan had stopped. He was looking at the ground. In the dark, she couldn't see his face. Kids aging out of the system, he said, very quiet. Yeah. A moment of silence, then he started walking again. He's done that, Ethan said. For years. He doesn't talk about it. It's not something he does for credit. She was watching him as they walked. Why? Nothing. And then because she'd been honest with him, because she trusted him with the name of her father and the shape of her fear and the reason she was in that van. Just thinking that the world is a strange place, she let that sit for a moment. Didn't push it. Some things you put down and let the other person pick up when they're ready. They walked in silence for a while. The cold deepened around 2 a.m. and then began almost imperceptibly to ease as they moved. Not warm, not close to warm, but slightly less hostile. Ethan gave her his jacket without ceremony, just held it out, and when she started to refuse, he shook his head once and she took it. He was wearing a thermal and a flannel and enough forward movement to keep his blood circulating. She was wearing one boot. The math was simple. You should know, Chloe said eventually, that when my father finds out what happened, when he finds out specifically that you're the one who did this, there will be a response. I'm not looking for a response. I know you're not, she said it carefully. That's actually what I mean. My father, the way he operates, he doesn't pay debts with money. He pays them with what they actually cost. What this cost you was risk. What it cost you was injury. She glanced at his hands, which were bleeding in 2 places from the work on the lock and the floor panel. What it cost you was probably everything you have, which from what I can tell isn't a lot, but is still everything. Ethan said nothing. What he gives in return is equivalent, Chloe said. Not financially, not formally, just he sees what things actually cost and he responds accordingly. She paused. I want you to be prepared for that. I'm not doing this to be prepared for anything, Ethan said. I'm doing it because you were in a chain. I know, she said it quietly. I know exactly why you're doing it. That's the point. The diner appeared on the horizon about 40 minutes later. A warm glow against the flat dark like a coal that hadn't gone out. Ethan saw it first and touched Chloe's arm to redirect her toward it. She saw it and something in her shoulders changed, not relaxation, the particular posture of someone who has been running a very controlled version of themselves and is starting to approach the moment where the control might not be necessary. They were 300 yards out when the ground started to vibrate, not under their feet, in the air, a low frequency that Ethan felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. He slowed, looked around. The highway to the south was empty. He could see the length of it from here. The road from the north was empty too. Chloe had stopped completely. She was standing very still with her head lifted. Chloe, Ethan said. She wasn't listening to him. She was listening to the vibration. And then from the north, from the direction they'd come from, somewhere beyond the darkness in the dead miles, the sound resolved. It was not one engine. It was not a dozen. It was the sound of something vast and mechanical and moving with a shared purpose, and it was getting closer with every second. Chloe pressed her hand flat against her chest over her father's vest. Her eyes, when she turned to Ethan, were full of something he didn't have a word for. Not relief, not fear, something that combined them in a ratio he'd never seen on a human face before. That's them, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan looked north, still nothing visible. But the sound was undeniable now. Hundreds of engines, moving fast, moving together. How many, he asked. Chloe shook her head slowly. How many people did your father call? She turned back to him, and there was something in her face that he would think about for a long time afterward. Everyone, she said. He called everyone. The horizon to the north began to glow with headlights. Not one set, not 10, a solid line of light stretching as wide as the highway, and then wider, spreading into the desert on both sides of the road, moving south toward them, like a slow tide that had decided it was done being slow. Ethan stood in the cold Nevada dark and watched 765 motorcycles come over the hill, and for the first time in 2 years of running, he didn't move. The headlights didn't slow down. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. A normal convoy, even a large one, would begin to decelerate when it spotted 2 people standing in the middle of a desert road at 4 a.m. These didn't. They came on at speed, the sound growing from a vibration in his chest to something that replaced all other sound in the world. And for one cold, irrational second, Ethan's entire body told him to run. He didn't run. He stood exactly where he was. Chloe grabbed his arm. Not to pull him away, she wasn't moving either. She grabbed it the way you grab something when the ground moves under you, and you need to know that at least one thing in your immediate world is solid. The lead bikes hit the flat stretch, and the headlights swept across both of them, and that's when they finally slowed. Not stopped, slowed, like the riders had seen what was in front of them and needed an extra second to process what they were seeing. Chloe, standing in the road, alive, wearing Marcus Anderson's vest. The lead bike stopped about 30 feet out. The ones behind fanned out and stopped behind it, and the ones behind those stopped behind those, and the stopping traveled back through the convoy like a wave reversing itself, and then there were 765 motorcycles sitting in the Nevada desert with their engines at idle, and their headlights pointed at a girl with a chain cuff on her wrist and a 20-year-old runaway standing beside her. The silence after that much engine noise was its own kind of violence. The rider on the lead bike pulled off his helmet. Ethan had expected someone who looked like a threat. That was his honest expectation. Someone built to intimidate, carrying years of hard living on his face like a warning label. What he saw instead was a man in his mid-50s with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had been through enough weather, emotional and physical, that it had settled into something that was beyond either anger or softness. Something that had burned through both and come out the other side. Who was big? That part was accurate, wide through the shoulders, solid through the chest. But the way he swung off the bike and put his boots on the ground and started walking toward them. It wasn't the walk of someone performing threat. It was the walk of someone who had been running toward this moment in his mind for 72 hours and was now finally here. He stopped 6 feet from Chloe. His eyes moved over her. Not the way a commander assesses a situation. The way a father looks at his child after 3 days of not knowing. He took in the cuff, the cut above her eye, the boot she was missing, the jacket that wasn't hers. He took in all of it without moving, without speaking, and something in his face shifted in a way that was private, even with 300 people watching. Then Chloe said, "Dad," just that. And Marcus Anderson, who people called Grizzly because of what he could become when something threatened what he loved, crossed the remaining distance in 2 steps and put his arms around his daughter. And Ethan watched one of the most feared men in the California motorcycle world hold her like she was something fragile that he was terrified to damage further, and he didn't say anything at all because some things don't have words. Ethan stepped back. He stepped back not because he was told to, but because this was not his moment, and he understood that instinctively. He moved to the edge of the road and crossed his arms over his chest against the cold and looked at the ground and gave them what the moment required. He became aware gradually that while Marcus and Chloe were the center of the scene, he was not invisible. He could feel eyes on him, not hostile exactly, but assessing. 200 riders watching the kid who had stepped back, cataloging him the same way Chloe had cataloged him in the van, fast, complete, professional. He kept his eyes down. He heard Chloe's voice, first low and urgent, against her father's chest. Then Marcus's voice, rough and controlled, asking her something he couldn't hear. Her answer was longer. Then silence. Then Marcus said something short and she answered, and then there was a pause and he heard his own name in her voice. Ethan looked up. Marcus Anderson was looking at him. Not the assessment the other riders were running. Something different. Ethan had been looked at plenty in his life by social workers, by foster parents, by police officers running a check on the kid sleeping under a bridge. He knew what it felt like to be seen as a problem or a category or a statistic. This was not that. Marcus was looking at him the way you look at something you weren't expecting and don't yet have a word for. He walked toward Ethan. Chloe came with him, her hand on her father's arm, and Ethan noticed she kept it there, not restraining, just connected, like she was making sure the distance between them stayed manageable. Marcus stopped in front of him. Ethan met his eyes. Neither of them spoke for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then Marcus said, "My daughter tells me you broke her free with a crowbar and a socket wrench." "The socket didn't fit," Ethan said, "just the crowbar." Something moved in the corner of Marcus's mouth. Not quite a smile. The idea of one. "How long did it take you?" "I don't know exactly. 20 minutes maybe. The lock body wasn't hardened all the way through. If it had been, I'd have had to try something else." "What would you have tried?" "I hadn't figured that out yet." Marcus looked at him for another long moment. You knew who she was, what the vest meant. She told me, and you stayed anyway. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered it. Yeah. Widely, Ethan had known the question was coming. He'd had the walk across the desert to think about it, and what he'd come up with was not impressive, in the way that impressive answers are supposed to be. It was just true. Because nobody came for me, he said. When I needed it, nobody came, and I wasn't going to be the reason that happened to someone else. Marcus didn't respond right away. He absorbed it, and Ethan could actually tell that the man was not evaluating whether the answer was good enough. He was recognizing it, like hearing something in a language you thought only you spoke. How old are you? Marcus asked. 20. Where are your people? Ethan held his gaze. Don't have any. The words landed in the space between them and stayed there. Marcus looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he turned his head and said something to the man standing behind his left shoulder, a tall, lean rider with a sergeant-at-arms patch who had been close enough to hear the whole conversation. The man nodded once and moved away into the convoy. Marcus turned back to Ethan. I'm going to have someone look at your hands. Ethan looked down at them. He'd forgotten about the cuts. They're fine. They're bleeding. It's not bad. Son, Marcus said it simply, not with authority, with something closer to patience. Let me do this one thing. Ethan didn't have an answer to that, so he nodded. The next hour moved in fragments. A man named Rooster, who despite the name, was approximately the size of a refrigerator and had the careful hands of someone who'd done field medicine in conditions worse than this, cleaned and wrapped Ethan's palms without commentary while Ethan sat on the running board of a truck that had appeared from somewhere in the convoy. Rooster also produced a thermal jacket from somewhere and handed it to Ethan with the same lack of ceremony Ethan had used when he'd given his own jacket to Chloe. Chloe was 20 feet away with her father and 2 other people who Ethan gathered were medical, or at least medically experienced, running through the damage she'd sustained over 3 days. He could hear fragments of her voice, calm and methodical, going through it. What she'd been given to drink and when. The cut, the bruising, what she'd been told by the people who'd taken her. That last part made Marcus's posture change in a way Ethan could see from across the road. A rider came and stood near Ethan while Rooster worked. Not threateningly, just present. He was maybe 40 with a road captain's patch, and he looked at Ethan with an expression that was frankly curious. You were just passing through, he said. Looking for a place to sleep, Ethan said. And you found her. Found the van. She was in it. The road captain, his name patch said. Decker nodded slowly. She's been missing 3 days. We've had people covering 400 square miles looking for where they put her. Ethan said nothing. A scrapyard off Route 93, Decker said. It wasn't quite disbelief. It was the specific quality of not quite disbelief that comes from looking for something in all the right places and having it turn up in the one place you didn't think to check. We drove that highway twice. The van wasn't visible from the road, Ethan said. It was back behind several rows of crushed vehicles. You'd only find it if you were on foot and moving through the yard itself, which you did. I needed shelter. Decker looked at him for a moment. Rooster told me you walked 4 miles across open desert with Omer. She was injured. She managed most of it herself. You gave her your jacket. She was missing a boot. Decker was quiet. Then, like he was settling something internally, where are you from? Nowhere specific. Where are you headed? Ethan held his gaze. Nowhere specific. Decker nodded slowly, like this was information that meant something to him, even if it was the absence of information. He looked over at Marcus and Chloe, then back at Ethan. You should know, Decker said quietly, that Marcus Anderson does not forget things. He's not built that way. He paused. I'm telling you that for your information, not as a warning. There's a difference. Rooster tied off the bandaging on Ethan's right hand and started on the left. Ethan watched him work and thought about what Chloe had said on the walk out about equivalent debt, about her father seeing what things actually cost. He thought about what this had cost him. $17, half a granola bar, 2 bleeding hands, 1 jacket, 4 miles of desert walking in a thermal and a flannel. The risk of being in that van when the people who'd put Chloe there came back for her. And though he hadn't named it until just now, the end of whatever route he'd been on, whatever town he'd been moving toward, whatever next anonymous place he'd been planning to disappear into, that was gone now. He'd stepped sideways of the invisible life he'd been living and into something visible, and there was no stepping back. He didn't feel bad about it. That was the strange part. He'd made a decision in the dark that should have felt desperate, and it just hadn't. It had felt in a way he didn't have good language for, like the first decision he'd made in 2 years that was actually his. Marcus came over while Rooster was finishing up. He crouched down in front of Ethan so they were at the same level. It was a deliberate thing. Ethan registered it. This was not a man who crouched. She told me everything, Marcus said. The sequence of it, what you did and how. Ethan waited. She told me you knew they'd come back, that she warned you and you stayed. I didn't have a better option. You had the obvious option, Marcus said. The one most people take. He looked at Ethan's bandaged hands. She also told me about the foster system, aging out. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, the particular contraction that came with being seen in a place he normally kept private. That's not why I helped her. I know it's not. Marcus's voice was even, definite, like he'd already decided this and wasn't entertaining debate about it. I know exactly why you helped her. She told me that too. He paused. Nobody came for you, so you went for her. Ethan said nothing. I want to ask you something, Marcus said, and I want you to answer me honestly, not correctly. Not the answer you think I want, honest. Okay. What do you need right now, tonight, this week, this month? What does your life actually need that it doesn't have? Ethan stared at him. The question was so direct, it took him off guard. He'd been asked what he wanted plenty of times in the performing way. Social workers ask it when they have already decided what they can offer. He'd never been asked what he needed by someone who looked like they were genuinely waiting to hear the answer. He thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. Sleep, he said. A real meal. A few days somewhere that I don't have to move from. He paused. After that, work. Something I can do that earns something. I'm good with my hands. I know engines' basic mechanics. I'm a fast learner with anything structural. Marcus nodded, slow and deliberate. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. They moved before dawn. The convoy reorganized with the efficiency of something that had done this before, not chaotic, just large, like watching a river reroute itself through a series of decisions that looked effortless from above. Chloe rode with her father. Ethan was offered a seat in the truck that had produced the thermal jacket, and he took it without argument because his legs were done and he knew it. The driver was a quiet man named Sal, who had been with the club for 22 years and who communicated primarily in eyebrow movements in the occasional syllable. Ethan found this comfortable. He sat in the passenger seat and watched the desert give way to pre-dawn gray and said nothing, and Sal said nothing, and it was the most peaceful Ethan had felt in 2 years. He was almost asleep when Sal said without preamble, Rooster says you were walking on a busted shoulder. Ethan opened his eyes. It's not busted, just stiff. From before tonight. Yeah. Sal's eyebrow moved. What from? Someone grabbed me at a truck stop in Elko about 12 days ago. Grabbed you how? Hard. Sal's other eyebrow joined the first. He looked at the road. You get that looked at? No. Rooster's going to look at it when we stop. It's fine. Rooster's going to look at it anyway, Sal said with the particular patience of someone who has worked alongside a medic long enough to know that winning this argument is not possible. Might as well agree now. Ethan closed his eyes again. He slept for 23 minutes before the convoy slowed and the truck rolled off a highway ramp and the change in motion woke him. They were pulling into a cluster of buildings, a gas station, a motel, a diner larger than the one he'd been aiming for, and the convoy was spreading into the parking areas with practiced ease bikes finding spaces, engines cutting out in waves. Outside, the sky had gone from black to the particular bruised purple that happens about 40 minutes before sunrise, and the air had that quality it gets right before warmth returns to it. Ethan sat up. Through the windshield, he could see Chloe getting out of her father's bike. She'd ridden pillion the whole way, and he could see in the careful way she moved that the adrenaline of the rescue was wearing off, and what was underneath it was making itself known. Marcus was right there, one hand on her back, steady as furniture. Rooster appeared at Ethan's window like he'd materialized. Shoulder, he said. I told Sal. I know what you told Sal. Rooster opened the door. Out. Ethan got out. Rooster was thorough and professional and completely unbothered by Ethan's insistence that the shoulder was manageable. He rotated it, pressed specific points, asked questions about where and when and how much, and arrived at a verdict. Not broken, he said. Significant soft tissue damage. You've been walking on it for almost 2 weeks and made it worse. You need to rest it or it becomes a real problem in about 2 months. Rest isn't always. I know rest isn't always an option, Rooster said not unkindly, for someone living the way you've been living. I'm telling you the medical reality. What you do with it is your business. He produced a compression wrap from a bag that seemed to contain approximately everything. But I'm going to wrap it before you argue, so hold still. Ethan held still. Across the parking area, he could see Marcus talking to a group of senior riders, the ones with the rocker patches and the worn vests that spoke to decades, not years. The conversation was contained, but he could read the energy of it from 50 feet away. Not anger, not planning, something that combined both in the specific way that meant decisions were being made that would have consequences for the people who had taken Chloe. He thought about those people. I didn't know their names. He didn't know their organization. He knew they had had the confidence to take a Hells Angels chapter member's daughter, which meant either they were very powerful or they were very stupid, and the fact that they'd been doing this type of operation for long enough to try it suggested the former. He thought about what happened to them now. I thought about whether it was any of his business and arrived quickly at the conclusion that it wasn't. He'd gotten Chloe out. The rest of it was a world he didn't know and wasn't part of. You're thinking about something that's going to make you tense your shoulder, Rooster said without looking up from the wrap. How do you know? Because you've been relaxed for the past 2 minutes and now you're not. He tied off the wrap. Whatever it is, it'll be dealt with by other people. That part's not on you. I wasn't thinking it was. Rooster looked at him directly for the first time. He had the kind of eyes that had seen enough that they'd stop performing anything. Kid, you pulled someone out of a chain in the desert. Whatever comes after that is someone else's work. You did yours. Ethan nodded. Rooster started packing his bag. Marcus is going to want to talk to you again after breakfast. You should eat first. Low blood sugar makes people say shorter versions of true things, and I have a feeling the true version of whatever you have to say to him is going to need more words than that. Ethan looked at him. What did he tell you? He didn't tell me anything. I was standing close enough to hear. Rooster zipped the bag. 12 years, I've known Marcus Anderson. I've seen him pay a debt exactly 3 times in a way that changed someone's life. I can tell when he's doing it again. He stood, looked at Ethan squarely. Don't argue with him. It won't work, and he'll find it disrespectful, and you don't want to start that way. Start what way? But Rooster was already walking. Inside the diner, the energy was controlled chaos. Tables had been pushed together, orders were being placed in volume, and the 3 staff members on the early shift were moving with the focused intensity of people who had just realized this morning was going to be very different from every other morning. Ethan sat at the end of a long table, and someone put coffee in front of him without being asked, and he wrapped his bandaged hands around it and let the heat move through the wrap and into his palms. Chloe appeared and sat across from him. She looked better. Not while she needed sleep and a real medical evaluation, and probably several days of stillness, but better than she'd looked when he'd found her. Someone had cleaned the cut above her eye, and the bruising around it had the particular coloring of something that was at its worst and would now begin to improve. She'd found a second boot somewhere in the convoy's resources, and it fit approximately. She put both hands around her own coffee and looked at him. How are your hands? She said, wrapped. Rooster thinks he's in charge of me. He is medically. Everyone's accepted this. A pause. How's the shoulder? Ethan looked at her. You told him about the shoulder. I told him everything I'd observed. I observed carefully. She was completely unapologetic. It's a habit. He leaned back. It's fine. Rooster said soft tissue damage from about 12 days ago. It's manageable. Chloe was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sound of the convoy settling engines fully off, now conversations spreading through the parking lot had a particular texture to it, like a machine powering down from something very large. They're not going to let it go, Chloe said, not to give him information, to make sure he had it. The people who took you. Yeah, she looked at her coffee. They'll know I got out. They'll know someone helped me. They don't know who you are. They have no reason to know anything about you, but they'll go back to that van and they'll reconstruct what happened and they'll know it wasn't a professional extraction. Because a professional would have gotten the cuff off too, Ethan said. She almost smiled. Because a professional would have gotten the cuff off too. The almost smile fit. They'll think it was someone from the club, a solo operator who found the location independently. They won't be looking for a 20-year-old with a crowbar. Does that change anything? For you, it means you're probably not a specific target. She looked at him directly. For my father, it changes the nature of the next conversation he has with these people. Because they tried to use me as leverage and instead they lost me, which means the leverage failed, which means they're in a weaker position than they were before they took me. A pause. Mom, my father will find a way to remind them of that. Ethan thought about this. Will it be dangerous for him, for the club? Probably. She said it the way someone says a true thing they have made peace with. This kind of conflict usually is. But they know what they're doing, and they've navigated things like this before. She looked at him. It's not your weight to carry. Rooster said something similar. Rooster is wise. Rooster told me not to argue with your father. Chloe set her coffee down, looked at him with something that was its own kind of instruction. He's right about that too. What is your father going to? Ethan. She said his name the same way she'd said it in the dark outside the van. Deliberate. My father has been in this world for 30 years. He's seen what it costs people to have nobody and no ground. He's also seen what it means when someone does the right thing without being positioned to benefit from it. She paused. What you did last night cost you something significant. It changes your route, your cover, your ability to disappear the way you've been doing. And you did it anyway, for someone you didn't know with nothing in reserve. Ethan said nothing. He's going to want to respond to that, Chloe said. Not out of obligation, not as a transaction, because he knows what that kind of moment costs and he doesn't let it go unaddressed. She picked her coffee back up. So when he talks to you this morning, listen, that's all I'm saying. The coffee was the best thing Ethan had tasted in 2 weeks. He drank it slowly and thought about what it meant to be told to listen, and thought about the fact that nobody had asked him to listen in a long time. They'd either told him to leave or told him what to do, and this was different from both of those. Marcus came in about 15 minutes later. He moved through the diner in the particular way that authority moves, not pushing, not demanding, but creating a wake. People shifted, made room, not from fear, from the particular respect that comes from watching someone operate with integrity for long enough that it becomes fact. He sat down across from Ethan. Chloe, without a word, picked up her coffee and moved to the next table, giving them what they needed. Marcus looked at Ethan for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about the shoulder." Ethan stared at him. "Rooster already. Rooster told me the medical piece. I want to know how it happened. Truck stop in Elko. Man decided I was in a space I shouldn't be in. He was bigger than me. Did you fight back?" "I tried to." A pause. "Wasn't my best performance." Marcus nodded slowly. "How long have you been sleeping rough?" 2 years since I aged out, 3 weeks in this stretch of Nevada specifically. Before Nevada, Utah, before that Arizona, I generally move when I feel like a place is getting too familiar with me. Familiar how? In the way that makes people start asking questions or calling people. Marcus absorbed this. He ordered coffee from a server who appeared briefly and then vanished, and he kept his eyes on Ethan through the whole exchange, which was the kind of attention that most people felt like a weight. Ethan didn't look away. "The garage," Marcus said. "You told me you knew engines. What kind of experience?" 8 months working at an independent shop in Phoenix 2 years ago. Before that, one of my foster placements was with a man who rebuilt vintage bikes on weekends. I worked beside him every weekend for about a year and a half. He was the best placement I had. Ethan paused. He died. Cardiac event. I was 16. Marcus looked at him. Something moved in his expression and settled back. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." 2 years isn't a long time. You were 16. Ethan had no answer to that, so he said nothing. "The club has a shop," Marcus said. "Oakland. We also have one in Reno that's been operating with one experienced mechanic for about 6 months because his partner relocated. It's not a large operation, but it's legitimate, licensed, insured, real customers." He paused. "We need someone with hands and the willingness to learn the rest." Ethan looked at him carefully. I'm not talking about charity, Marcus said, and there was something in the way he said it that made clear he'd read the particular tension in Ethan's posture correctly. I'm talking about a position. Housing is attached to the Reno location. There's a room above the shop that's been empty since December. It's basic. You'd earn it. I don't, Ethan stopped, started again. I don't know how to be in one place. I know. Marcus looked at him steadily. That's going to take time. It's a skill, like any other skill. You learn it by doing it. And if I'm bad at it, then you're bad at it and we work on it. Marcus picked up his coffee when it arrived. I'm not offering you perfect. I'm offering you real. There's a difference. Ethan's hands were flat on the table, wrapped and still. He looked at them. He thought about the van. He thought about the chain sound in the dark and the 2 seconds where he'd made a decision without fully understanding what he was deciding. He thought about how the man sitting across from him had just described the thing Ethan had stopped being able to find. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, just something real and workable and connected to other human beings. I'd need to pull my weight, Ethan said. That's the deal. I'd need to be able to leave if... You can leave any time you want, Marcus said immediately. I'm not offering a cage. I'm offering a door that opens both ways, he paused. But I'm also telling you from 30 years of watching men who couldn't stop running that the thing you're looking for isn't at the end of the next road. It's not in the next town. You know that already. You just haven't had anywhere worth stopping yet. Ethan held his gaze. The diner was full of sound around them. Voices, movement, the particular energy of a large group eating and decompressing after a night of high tension. None of it touched the space at their table. Okay, Ethan said. Marcus nodded. Once. Like a decision confirmed rather than a battle won. There's one more thing, Marcus said. His voice dropped slightly. Not for privacy, for weight. The people who took Chloe, they're going to be addressed. I want you to know that, not because I'm asking for anything from you about it, but because you were part of last night and you deserve to know how it ends. He looked at Ethan directly. It ends with them understanding clearly that what they tried doesn't work. Not through violence. We're past the age where that's the answer to everything. Through consequence, financial, legal, and reputational. There are people in this convoy who have the capacity for all three, and they've already started. He paused. You're not in danger from them. I've already made sure the trail from that van doesn't lead to you. Ethan stared at him. How? Because the first call I made when Chloe told me what happened was to make sure that 20-year-old kid's name was nowhere near anything they could find. Marcus looked at him with an expression that was the closest thing to paternal that Ethan Walker had seen in 4 years. You stepped into something that wasn't yours to carry. The least I could do was make sure it didn't follow you. For the first time since the night before, Ethan felt something in his chest loosen. Not relief exactly, something older than relief. The particular physical sensation of a weight you've been carrying so long. You forgot it was there, finally being set down by someone else's hands. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have words for what he felt, and Marcus didn't seem to expect any. Outside the window, the sun had finally cleared the horizon, and the desert was doing what the desert does when the light hits it. Right, turning everything briefly gold before settling back into its ordinary colors. The convoy was moving in the parking lot, engines waking up, conversations wrapping the enormous organism of it, preparing to continue. Ethan sat at a table in a diner in Nevada with bandaged hands and a wrapped shoulder and $17 in his boot. And for the first time in 2 years, he wasn't thinking about the next road. He was thinking about Reno, about a room above a shop, about engines and what it felt like to understand the thing you were working on well enough to hear what it needed. Chloe appeared at the edge of his vision. She was watching him from the next table with the same assessing look she'd had in the van. But the calculation in it was different now. It wasn't survival math anymore. It was something quieter than that. She raised her coffee cup just slightly. He looked at it for a second. Then he picked up his own cup and raised it back. The room above the shop smelled like motor oil and old wood and something that might have been coffee left on a burner too long, and Ethan stood in the middle of it with a duffel bag that Marcus's people had packed for him. Used clothes mostly, but clean, and the right sizes in a way that told him someone had paid attention, and he stood there for about 3 minutes without doing anything at all. I was waiting for the feeling that the floor was going to move, that someone was going to knock on the door and tell him there'd been a mistake, That the version of this where he got to stay was actually someone else's version and he'd wandered into it by accident. The floor didn't move. Nobody knocked. And he put the duffel bag on the bed, a real bed, a full size with a frame and a mattress that didn't have a history he could feel, and he sat down next to it on the floor because the bed felt like too much to commit to immediately. He sat there until it got dark outside. Then he got up, lay down on the bed with his boots still on, and slept for 14 hours straight. The man who ran the Reno shop was named Del Whitmore, and he was 61 years old and had the disposition of someone who had long ago made his peace with the fact that the world was mostly aggravating and had decided to be useful within that constraint. He was a full member of the chapter, but he operated the shop the way you operate something you genuinely care about personally specifically, with strong opinions about the right way to do things and no interest in people who disagreed for bad reasons. He'd met Ethan on the first morning with a coffee and a direct look and said, "Marcus told me you know engines." "Basic level," Ethan said. "I'm not going to oversell it." "Good. People who oversell get found out in the first hour. What do you actually know?" Ethan told him. Precisely. The Phoenix shop, what he'd done there, the limits of it. The vintage bike work with his foster father, what that had covered and what it hadn't. What he'd taught himself in between those two periods, because there was time and library computers and nothing else to do. Del listened without interrupting, which Ethan had learned was rare in people who asked questions. When Ethan finished, Del was quiet for a moment. "You know what you don't know," Del said. "That's actually the more useful thing. Marcus said you have been running short-handed. For 6 months. My last partner moved to Boise when his wife got a job offer. I don't blame him." Del drank his coffee. "We've got a full schedule. Mostly club bikes, but we do public work too. It pays the licensing fees and it keeps things clean on paper." He paused. "You're going to spend the first 2 weeks watching what I do before I let you touch anything structural. Non-negotiable." "That's fair. If you've got the instincts Marcus thinks you have, 2 weeks will be enough." Del set his mug down. "If you don't, we'll figure out something else you're good at. But you're not going to be standing around either way." "I don't want to stand around." "I could tell that from the handshake," Del said. And then, because Del was the kind of person who said exactly what he meant, and no more, he turned and walked back into the shop and Ethan followed him. That was how it started. The first week was hard in the way that starting anything real is hard. Not dramatic, just the accumulation of small difficulties that come with learning a new physical language where everything is what everything means, what the sounds and rhythms of a functioning shop feel like when you're inside them rather than outside looking in. Del ran an efficient operation, not fast, precise. There was a difference, he explained once without being asked, while they were pulling a primary chain on a Sportster that had been making a sound its owner described as like a cat eating gravel. "Fast means you skip steps because you're confident," Del said. "Precise means you don't skip steps because you respect the machine. Fast gets you done. Precise gets you done right." He looked at the chain without looking at Ethan. "A bike that goes back on the road wrong kills its rider. You understand?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Good, don't forget it." Ethan didn't forget it. I was a good learner, not a showy one. He didn't announce when he understood something or ask questions to demonstrate how well he was following. He watched, he processed, he tried, he adjusted. Del noticed this the way someone notices a tool that does exactly what it's supposed to do, and his commentary shifted slowly from instruction to conversation, which was its own form of approval. The evenings were harder. The room above the shop was his, and he was grateful for it, and it was also the most alone he'd been in years. Being alone on the road was different. There was always the next mile, the next decision, the constant low-level problem-solving that filled your brain and kept the quiet from becoming heavy. In the room, there was no next mile. There was just stillness, and stillness had a texture he was still learning. He called nobody because he had nobody to call. He read. He'd found a box of paperback books under the bed that the previous occupant had left, a mix of westerns and military history, and 2 novels he didn't recognize. And he worked through them in the evenings with the focus of someone who'd learned that reading was the best way to make 4 walls not feel like a trap. On the 8th night, his phone rang. It was Chloe. He stared at the name on the screen for 2 rings before he answered. Because nobody had called him in so long, that the act of the phone ringing felt like something he needed to verify was real. "Hey," he said, "you answered." She sounded mildly surprised. "You called." "I did." A pause. "How's the shop?" "Dell's teaching me how to think before I act. It's a process." Something like a laugh from her end. "Not quite. The shape of one. He's been doing that to people for 20 years. How's the shoulder better?" "I've been not using it the way Rooster told me." "Rooster will be pleased." Another pause. A different quality to it. "I wanted to check in, not because my father asked me to, because I wanted to." Ethan moved to sit on the floor with his back against the bed. "I figured. You doing okay up there?" "Honestly." I thought about honest. He'd been thinking about it a lot in the evenings, without an audience in the quiet that had texture. "I'm doing strange," he said. "Not bad. Strange. I keep waiting for it to stop being real." "The room, the shop. All of it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take a while, to feel like it's yours." She paused. "For what it's worth, it is yours. The room, the position, you're not there because my father pities you. I want to make sure you understand that." He explained it. He explained the practical version. "I'm telling you the other version." Her voice was direct. "The way it had been in the van. You did something that cost you for someone you had no reason to help. That means something to people who understand what it actually costs. It's not charity, it's recognition. Does that make sense?" Ethan looked at the ceiling of the room above the shop. Old plaster water stain in the shape of something that might have been a map, 2 cracks. He'd been unconsciously following the length of every night. "It makes sense," he said. "I'm still learning how to believe it." "That's fair." A pause. "How are the hand?" "Healed mostly. Dell made me wear gloves for the first week. I didn't argue." "Smart. He would have won." I could tell. There was a rhythm to the conversation that surprised him. Not awkward, not performed. Easy in the way that things are easy when both parties have already been through something real together and don't need to work up to honesty. "I should tell you something," Chloe said. The tone shifted, just slightly. "The situation with the people who took me. It's moving." Ethan straightened. "Moving how?" "The way my father said it would. Not it hasn't turned violent. That's not the direction he went." She paused. "But the people running the operation have started losing things. Business licenses, a property deal that collapsed, a city council relationship that turned out to be more fragile than they thought. And 2 of the lower level people, who were directly involved in my kidnapping, were picked up on federal charges that had nothing to do with us." "Coincidence," Ethan said flatly. "A remarkable one." He could hear the dryness in it. "The point is, it's being handled. And the message has been received that trying to use leverage against my father's family is not a net positive strategy." A pause. "You should know this because you were part of the night it started unraveling. I had 1 crowbar and a socket that didn't fit." "You had enough," she said simply. After he hung up, Ethan sat on the floor for a while longer, not thinking specifically, just letting the phone call settle the way a room settles after someone has been in it and left the air still slightly altered by their presence. Then he got up and went back to the book he'd been reading, and when the quiet came this time, it had slightly less weight than it did before. 3 weeks in let him start on structural work. It started with a carburetor rebuild on a 1987 Softail that belonged to a club member named Porter, who had ridden it to the shop wrapped in a patience that was visibly fraying. Porter was 63 and had owned the bike since it was new and treated it with the particular combination of pride and anxiety that comes with loving something mechanical for 4 decades. "Dell says you're the one who's going to be doing the carb," Porter said, leaning in the shop doorway. "Dell's supervising," Ethan said. "Dell's drinking coffee in the office," Porter said. "He's supervising from the office." Porter looked at him for a moment, then with the resigned acceptance of someone who has decided that trust is the only viable option. "She's been running lean since March. I've had 3 different people look at it." "I know, I read the service notes. And float heights off and the needle jets worn. The people who looked at it before adjusted the air-fuel mixture each time, which solved the symptom and not the problem, which meant the symptom came back." Porter stared at him. "I paid two of those guys good money." "I know." Ethan looked up from the bike. "They weren't dishonest. They just treated what they could see instead of looking for what was underneath it. It's a common mistake." Something shifted in Porter's face. The anxiety receded slightly. How long playing? Today, if the replacement jet is in stock. It was in stock. Ethan pulled the carburetor, stripped it down, confirmed what he'd suspected replaced the needle jet, set the float height correctly cleaned, everything rebuilt it. Dell came out of the office twice, looked at what Ethan was doing without saying anything and went back. The second time he came out, he brought coffee and set one down next to Ethan's work area without comment. When Porter took the bike down the block and back, the change was immediate. He sat on it in the parking lot for a moment after he killed the engine. Then he came back in. 37 years that bike has been mine, Porter said. I don't think she's ever run that clean. Ethan wiped his hands. Float height was off by almost 4 millimeters. Over time in a bike that age, that adds up. I know what it adds up to, Porter said, and he said it with the particular warmth of someone who isn't talking about fuel mixture anymore. He looked at Ethan for a moment. Then he stuck out his hand. Ethan shook it. After Porter left, Dell came and stood beside Ethan's bench. You were right about the jet, Dell said. I know. Don't get cocky about it. I'm not. Dell was quiet for a moment. You were also right about the other mechanics. They weren't wrong, just incomplete. You would have done the same thing I did. Yes, Dell said, but faster. Ethan looked at him. Is that a compliment? It's a timeline. Dell picked up his coffee. Give it another month. 4 weeks after the diner in Nevada, Marcus Anderson came to Reno. He didn't announce it. He didn't need to. He rode in on a Tuesday afternoon with 3 other riders parked in the lot, came into the shop and looked at what Ethan was working on with the same thorough attention he'd used on everything else. Ethan was mid-task on a transmission issue that had been giving him a longer afternoon than he'd planned for. He looked up when he heard the door registered who it was and said, "Give me 10 minutes." Marcus said nothing. He found a stool and sat on it and watched. The 10 minutes became 15 because the problem had more layers than initially presented, and Ethan worked through them without rushing because the bike was not going to be hurried and he wasn't going to start now. When he finally had it, he wiped down his hands and turned around. Marcus hadn't moved. Dell told me you've been doing good work, Marcus said. Dell told me I'd be faster in a month. That's a compliment from Dell. Marcus looked at the bike. How's the shoulder? At about 90%. Rooster said to tell you to stop lifting anything heavy with it for another 3 weeks. Rooster says that every time Chloe calls. Marcus's expression moved in the direction of something human. Chloe calls. She checks in. Ethan sat on the opposite bench. She doesn't have to. No, Marcus agreed. She doesn't. He looked at Ethan directly. How are you doing? And I mean the full answer, not the short one. Ethan thought about the full answer. He'd been thinking about it in different ways over the 4 weeks, turning it over in the evenings, testing what was true against what he wanted to be true. Better, he said, in ways I didn't expect. The work helps. Dell helps. He's exacting. And it turns out that's something I respond to. The room is, he paused. I sleep well. I hadn't slept well in 2 years. But, Ethan looked at him. Is there a but? There usually is, Marcus said, not cynically, just from experience. Ethan thought about it. I don't know how to trust that it stays, he said. Every time something has been stable, it's stopped being stable. At some point. Without warning, mostly. He paused. I know that's not a prediction about here. I know that. But it's a pattern in my thinking that I'm still working against. Marcus nodded slowly. That's not a flaw, he said. That's an accurate read of your history. The problem is when accurate reads of your history stop you from functioning in a present that's actually different. He paused. Are you talking to anyone about any of this? Ethan looked at him. You mean professionally? I mean anyone. Professionally, personally doesn't matter. I'm talking to you. I mean regularly. Ethan was quiet. There's a woman at the chapter community in Reno, Marcus said. Not affiliated with the club officially. She works with veterans mostly, but also with anyone who's been through extended periods of instability. Her name is Andra Keel. She's been useful to more than a few people I know. He paused. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you she exists. Ethan looked at the floor, then back at Marcus. You're telling me what to do. A little, Marcus admitted. Ethan almost laughed. It came out of him before he could contain it, a short, real sound that surprised him. Marcus heard it, and something in his face relaxed slightly. There's something I need to tell you, Marcus said. The tone changed again. Not grave, Specific. Ethan waited. The people who took Chloe, the operation is effectively over. We're not going to have any more trouble from that direction. He said it simply the way you report a weather change. But in the process of dealing with it, some information came to light about the scope of what they were doing. Beyond the extortion, there were other things. People who'd been harmed. People who hadn't come forward yet. What kind of people? Ethan said carefully. Young people mostly. People without networks. People who, if something happened to them, didn't have anyone who would push back hard. Marcus looked at him steadily. Sound familiar? Ethan's jaw tightened. The man who grabbed you at the Elko truck stop, Marcus said. The handprint bruise on your shoulder. We have reasonable certainty he was connected to the same network. The shop was very quiet. Ethan sat with that for a moment. The handprint on his shoulder that had been healing for 5 weeks. The man who had grabbed him, and the casual violence of it, not rage, not personal. Kind of grab that says you are not a person who matters, connected to the people who had put Chloe in a chain. That's, he started. I know. Marcus said it before Ethan could finish the sentence. I know. I wasn't a target. It wasn't about me specifically. No, you were in a space they used, and you were the type of person they preyed on. Wrong place, wrong type. Marcus paused. That doesn't make the bruise less real. Ethan breathed out slowly. What happened to him? He's in federal custody. Unrelated charges that happened to materialize in a timely fashion. Marcus's expression was neutral. He won't be grabbing anyone in a truck stop for a considerable amount of time. Ethan looked at his hands. The scars from the crowbar work faded now, but still visible, running across his right palm in a diagonal that he'd started thinking of as geography rather than damage. Ethan, Marcus leaned forward slightly, I need you to hear this clearly. What happened to you over the past 2 years? The displacement, the exploitation, the specific moment at that truck stop? None of it was a consequence of who you are. It was a consequence of a system that failed you and people who preyed on that failure. He paused. You understand the difference. Intellectually, Ethan said, and in your chest. Ethan looked at him. I'm working on it. Marcus nodded. That's what Sandra Keel is for. He stood. Come have dinner with us tonight. Dell is coming. Decker is in town. No agenda. Just food. I don't, Ethan started. Ethan. Yeah. Stop reflexively saying no to things that are good for you. It's a habit and it doesn't serve you anymore. Marcus said it without heat, as a fact offered from a direction that was closer to care than any direction Ethan was used to receiving. Ethan closed his mouth. Then he said, what time? Marcus almost smiled. 7. Dell knows the place. Dinner was at a steakhouse 2 miles from the shop that had been open since 1978 and showed it, which was not a criticism, because the kind of where a place accumulates over 45 years of consistent good work is its own form of character. Dell sat next to Ethan and spent the first 20 minutes arguing with Decker about a carburetor adjustment approach that Ethan had been present for in the shop 2 days prior, and Ethan understood within about 4 minutes that this was not a real argument, but a performance that both men enjoyed and had been performing in various forms for years. He watched them with the particular attention of someone who had never seen that kind of relationship, the casual intimacy of people who know each other well enough to fight about nothing as a form of affection and tried not to show how unfamiliar it was. Marcus watched him watching them and didn't say anything about it. The food was real and the portions were significant, and Ethan ate with the focus of someone who has lived on gas station food long enough that a proper meal is not a background event. There were 6 people at the table, and by the time they were midway through the main course, Ethan had been talked to by all of them in the natural way, not the careful way that people talk to someone they've been briefed about. Porter was there. He'd run into Porter twice in the week since the carburetor job, and each time the man had mentioned his bike with a specific satisfaction. And Porter talked to Ethan about the bike, and then about the drive he'd taken up into the Sierra Nevada, and then about his wife's horse, which had recently decided to be afraid of plastic bags. And somehow this all connected to a story about a run to Reno in 1989 that ended with Dell owing Porter a significant sum that Dell refused to discuss. Ethan laughed 3 times at the table. Genuine laughs, not the social performance of amusement. The kind that happen before you can decide whether to have them. After dinner, when they were outside, Marcus walked with Ethan toward Dell's truck. Tell me something, Marcus said. Ethan looked at him. The night you found her. The van. When you heard the chain sound, what was the actual moment you decided to stay? Ethan thought about it. He'd thought about it before, but never with someone asking. There wasn't a moment, he said. That's the honest answer. I didn't decide, I just didn't leave. The decision not to go was it happened before I consciously made it. He paused. I've been trying to figure out if that's something about who I am or something about that specific moment. And I don't know yet. Marcus walked beside him in silence for a few steps. Both, he said. It's almost always both. Ethan nodded. What I can tell you, Marcus said, is what Chloe told me 2 days after we brought her home. She was sitting at my kitchen table and she was talking through the night, piece by piece, the way she does when she's processing something. And she got to the part where you came back from the scrapyard with the crowbar. And she said, Dad, he never looked scared. Not because he wasn't scared, because the fear was just not the most important thing in him right then. Ethan said nothing. That's not something you can fake, Marcus said. Chloe has been around people who perform courage her entire life. She knows the difference. She knew it at 4 a.m. in a dark van when she couldn't even see your face clearly. He paused. That's who you are, not who you were in that moment. Who you are. They reached the truck. Dell was already there, keys in hand, saying something to Decker that Decker was rebutting on a technicality. Marcus stopped, turned to Ethan fully. I want to tell you one more thing tonight. Ethan met his eyes. When I was 22 years old, I aged out of the system. Not foster care, juvenile detention. 3 years in out at 17, back in at 18 out, for good at 22. He said it the way he said everything important, flat, direct, without apology or performance. The man who gave me a chance was not required to. He did it because I happened to be in front of him at the right time, and he was the kind of person who responded to what was in front of him. He paused. He's been dead for 16 years. I've never stopped trying to be what he was for other people. The parking lot was quiet around them. The night was cold, but not Nevada desert, cold, manageable, breathable. Ethan stood with everything Marcus had just said and felt the specific weight of it. Not a burden, the other kind of weight, the kind that tells you something is real. What was his name? Ethan asked. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Roy, he said. His name was Roy. Ethan nodded. They shook hands in the parking lot, and it was a different kind of handshake than the first one. That one had been a transaction. This one was something harder to name. Dell honked once from the truck cab, and Marcus turned and walked back toward his bike, and Ethan climbed into the passenger seat. Dell pulled out of the lot. Good dinner, Dell said. Yeah, Ethan said. Good dinner. Dell drove. The city passed outside the windows. They didn't talk much, which was fine because Dell was a man who understood that silence between people who respect each other is not emptiness. At the shop, Ethan got out. He stood in the parking lot for a moment after Dell drove away. The light was on in the shop window. Dell always left the interior light on overnight, some habit from years ago that he'd never explained. Ethan looked up at the room above it. His room, the window dark because he'd turn the light off when he left and he'd be the one to turn it back on. I thought about Roy, who had been dead for 16 years. He thought about Marcus at 22, aging out of a system that releases you into nothing and expects something. He thought about Dell's coffee appearing next to his work area without comment, about Porter's handshake, about Chloe's voice on the phone checking in because she wanted to. I thought about the chain sound in the dark and the 2 seconds where nothing was decided consciously, and in what Chloe had said to her father. The fear was just not the most important thing in him right then. He stood there until the cold made a decision for him. Then he went inside and turned the light on. Sandra Keel's office was above a hardware store on a street that had been slowly figuring out what it wanted to be for about 15 years. She had 2 plants on the windowsill that were doing better than most plants Ethan had seen in office settings, a clock on the wall that was accurate, and a chair across from hers that was the kind of comfortable that didn't announce itself. He'd made the appointment on a Wednesday and spent the following 4 days finding reasons to cancel it and then not canceling it, which was its own kind of progress. He sat down in the chair and she looked at him and said, Marcus Anderson told me a little. Tell me what he left out. Ethan looked at her. She was maybe 50, with the particular stillness of someone who had made a professional practice of listening and had gotten genuinely good at it. Not performed stillness, the real kind. He probably left out most of it, Ethan said. Then start wherever you want. He started at 18. The garbage bag and the bus ticket, in the city he'd been sent to that he'd left within 3 weeks, because it was clear that the support services he'd been pointed toward were designed for people who already had enough to work with. He went through the 2 years, not linearly, he moved through it the way memory moves by association, by emotional temperature. Sandra didn't redirect him or impose a structure. She listened and occasionally asked a question that was small and precise, the kind of question that opens a door rather than closes one. They talked for an hour. At the end, she said, "What do you need from me specifically?" Ethan thought about it. "I need to understand the pattern," he said. "The one where something gets stable and I wait for it to stop being stable instead of just being in it." Hypervigilance, she said, not as a diagnosis, as a description. Your nervous system learned to treat stability as temporary because every stable thing you had was temporary. It's trying to protect you from a version of your life that isn't your life anymore. "How do I tell it that?" "Slowly," she said, "consistently, with evidence." She paused. "You've been in Reno for 5 weeks." "Yes." "And in those 5 weeks, the stable things have stayed stable." "Yes." "That's evidence. Every day that it holds is evidence. Your nervous system is going to need a lot of it before it starts revising the pattern. That's not a flaw in you. That's how nervous systems work when they've been through what yours has been through." She looked at him directly. "You're not broken, Ethan. You're calibrated to a reality that no longer exists. That's a different problem, and it has a different solution." He sat with that. "Same time next week," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Same time." He walked back to the shop with his hands in the pockets of the jacket Marcus's people had packed for him, the one that fit, and the morning felt different than the morning usually felt. Not like, more specific. Like something that had been a general weight had been named, and named things are smaller than unnamed things. Dell was under a road king when Ethan walked in, visible only from the knees down, and he said without emerging, "There's coffee," and Porter called. "What does Porter want?" "His wife's cousin has a 72 shovelhead that hasn't run since 2009. Wants to know if we do restorations." Ethan hung up his jacket. "Do we?" Dell's legs shifted. A wrench clinked against the floor. "We do now, apparently." The shovelhead arrived on a flatbed 10 days later, and when Ethan walked around it for the first time, he felt a specific feeling he'd felt as a teenager in a garage in Arizona, watching a man who'd known him for 7 months treat him like he was worth teaching. The feeling of something genuinely difficult presenting itself, and the recognition that difficult was not the same as impossible. The bike was in bad shape, not destroyed, neglected, which was its own category of damage. 14 years of sitting in a garage had done what 14 years of sitting does to a machine that needs to move. He called Chloe that night, not about the bike, or not only about the bike. She picked up on the second ring. "Dell says you're taking on a full restoration," she said before he could start. "How do you know that?" "Dell texts my father. My father tells me things." A pause. "Are you ready for that level of project?" "Probably not entirely. I'm doing it anyway." That tracks. He could hear her moving somewhere on her end, the particular sounds of someone in a kitchen. "How was Sandra?" "Good. She's precise. She doesn't let you be vague. She's like that with everyone. It's not comfortable, but it works." A pause. "You're going back every week." "Good." The word was short and carried more than it needed to. Then, "I'm coming to Reno next. My father has business there, and I'm riding up with him. I wanted to tell you directly rather than have you find out through the Marcus to Dell to you pipeline." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Okay. Is that okay? Actually okay, not polite okay." "Actually okay," he said. "Yeah." She arrived on a Thursday, riding her own bike, a Dyna that she handled with the ease of someone who'd been on 2 wheels since before she was technically legal to be, and she came into the shop still in her riding gear and looked at the shovel head on the lift and let out a low sound that was pure mechanical appreciation. "Where did this come from?" she said. "Porter's wife's cousin. Hasn't run since 2009. Chloe walked around it the same way Ethan had on the first day. She crouched down, looked at specific points, stood back up. "You started on the engine cases yet?" "Not yet. I've been working through the electrical first because it's easier to assess what else needs to happen once I know what the electrical system is actually doing." She looked at him. "That's a Dell approach." "I've been absorbing Dell." She almost smiled. "How long do you think?" 3 months minimum. More if I find what I think I'm going to find in the lower end." Chloe looked at the bike again, then at Ethan. There was something evaluating in it, not critical, just the assessing quality she'd always had, running a current reading on him against whatever previous reading she was holding. "You look different," she said. "Different how? Less like you're waiting for the ground to move." She said it simply, as an observation. Ethan thought about Sandra's phrase, calibrated to a reality that no longer exists. "Working on it," he said. "I can tell." She turned back to the shovelhead. "Can I help with the electrical assessment? I know shovels. My father had one when I was a kid. I spent a lot of hours watching him work on it." "You have time?" "I have today," she said, "and that's enough." They worked side by side for 4 hours, and it was easy in the way that working alongside someone who's competent is always easy. No wasted motion, no explanation of things that don't need explaining, just the shared language of people who understand what they're looking at. She found a wiring issue behind the headlight nacelle that Ethan had missed, and she found it without comment, just held it up so he could see, and he nodded and made a note. Dell came through at midday and looked at the two of them and said absolutely nothing, which from Dell was a comprehensive statement. The twist came on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks later, and it came from a direction nobody had been watching. Ethan was alone in the shop. Dell had a doctor's appointment routine, he'd said, with the specific dismissiveness of someone who doesn't discuss health things, and Ethan had been left with the day in the shovelhead and a list of things to work through. The man who walked in at 10:15 was not a customer. Ethan knew it within 3 seconds. It wasn't the way he was dressed or the way he moved specifically, it was the combination of everything. The particular quality of someone performing casual while running a calculation. Ethan had spent 2 years reading people in spaces where reading them incorrectly had real consequences, and the reading was automatic now. The man was maybe 45, medium build. He looked at the shop the way you look at something you've studied from outside and are now seeing from inside for the first time. "Nice place," he said. Ethan set his wrench down, stood up fully. "Can I help you?" "Maybe." The man's eyes moved around the shop. "I'm looking for Dell Whitmore." "Dell's not here today. If you want to leave a number." "It's not really a Dell question." The man's eyes came back to Ethan. "You're Walker, Ethan Walker." Ethan said nothing. "I'm not here to cause a problem," the man said, and he put his hands up slightly, the gesture people used to say unarmed, which Ethan registered and did not fully believe. "I want to talk to you. 5 minutes." "About what?" "About the night in the scrapyard." He paused. "About what you saw." Ethan's mind ran it fast. What he'd seen in the scrapyard was Chloe in a chain. What he'd seen of the people who'd put her there was nothing. He'd been gone before they returned, and Marcus had made certain that Ethan's name was nowhere near the investigation. Nowhere near the official investigation. "Who are you?" Ethan said. "My name is Garrett Howell. I'm a federal investigator, not FBI. I'm with a task force. The network that took the Anderson girl was connected to a larger operation, and we've been building a case for—" He stopped. "Can I show you a credential?" Slowly, Ethan said. Howell reached into his jacket and produced an ID that looked right, the right format, the right agency insignia. Ethan looked at it for a few seconds. "What do you need from me?" Ethan said. "You were in that van before anyone else. You were there for—" Howell checked a note, "approximately 20 to 25 minutes before you left with the Anderson woman. I need to know if you saw anything that you haven't told anyone. Documents, phones, anything left in the van." Ethan thought about the van, the floor he'd pried up, the bolt ring, the chain, the lock body, Chloe in the corner. "There was a phone," he said. Howell went very still. "In the wheel well on the driver's side. I saw it when I was looking at the floor structure. Small prepaid type. It was taped to the inside of the wheel well housing." Howell stared at him. "You didn't mention this to Marcus Anderson." "I didn't think about it until right now. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was looking for a way to break a lock." Ethan paused. "Is the phone still there?" "The van was moved within 12 hours of you leaving. We don't know where it went." Howell's jaw had tightened by a degree. "If that phone was there—" "It was there. I saw it clearly. I didn't touch it." Howell was quiet for running something. "You're sure? Driver's side wheel well taped inside." "Yes." "Did you see anything on the screen? Any indication of—" "It wasn't on. It was taped dark, side out. The screen was facing the wheel housing." I only noticed it because my lighter caught the edge of it. Howell pulled out a card, held it out to Ethan. If you remember anything else, anything at all, I need you to call me directly. Not through Anderson, directly. Ethan took the card. Why not through Anderson? Howell looked at him carefully. Because Anderson is involved in the resolution of this situation in ways that are adjacent to what we're doing. I'm not saying he's a problem. I'm saying our investigation and his response to what happened are two separate tracks, and I need mine to stay clean. He paused. You understand the distinction? Yeah, Ethan said. After Howell left, Ethan stood in the shop for 3 minutes without moving. Then he called Marcus. He didn't call Dell. He didn't wait for Marcus to come through the Dell to Ethan pipeline. He called Marcus directly, which he had not done in the 7 weeks he'd been in Reno. Marcus picked up on the second ring. A federal investigator named Garrett Howell was just in the shop, Ethan said. He showed me a credential. He wanted to know what I saw in the van. I told him about the phone in the wheel well. He gave me his card and told me to contact him directly rather than through you. Silence on the line. Not long, 3-4 seconds. But the quality of it told Ethan that Marcus was running several things simultaneously. Did you touch the phone? Marcus asked. No, I saw it and didn't think about it until he described what he was looking for. The card doesn't have a direct number or a main line direct number. Hold on to it. A pause. Howell is real. His task force is real. What he told you about the two investigations being separate tracks is also real. He's not wrong to want you to contact him directly. Another pause. You did the right thing calling me. I wasn't sure you'd want me to. I always want you to. Marcus's voice was even. You're not caught between anything, Ethan. The task force does their work and we do ours, and the outcome for the people involved is the same in both cases. The only question is paper trail and Howell is managing his. You're not a problem for either side. A pause. How are you? Ethan almost laughed at the transition. I'm fine. It was unexpected. He should have come through me first, Marcus said, and there was a temperature to it. Not angry, just the particular certainty of someone who maintains orderly systems and notices when they're not respected. I'll make a call. It won't happen again. It's okay. It's manageable, Marcus said. Not quite the same as okay, but manageable. A pause. Call me if anything else comes up. Anything. Don't filter me. Okay. Good. And then without transition. Dell's appointment is routine. He'll be back by 2. Don't let him skip lunch. Ethan stared at his phone after he hung up. Then he set it on the bench and picked up his wrench and went back to the shovel head because the bike was not going to make progress by itself, and that was right now what he had control over. Sure. 2 days later, Chloe called. My father told me about Howell, she said. Of course he did. You called him right away. It wasn't a question. He said to call about anything. I figured a federal investigator asking me what I saw in the van qualified. It did. She was quiet for a moment. The phone is important. If they find the van and the phone is still there, the people behind the network use those prepaid phones in a specific way. Locations timing, if there's any data on it, it's significant. Howell looked like he understood that. He does. He's been on this for over a year. She paused. He came to you because you're the one who was in the van and you're not officially connected to us on paper. You were the cleanest witness he had. Ethan thought about that. The cleanest witness. 2 months ago, he'd been a 20-year-old sleeping in scrapyards with $17 in his boot, and now he was a clean witness in a federal task force investigation because he'd been in the wrong place at the right time and had made a decision in the dark. The world was as he'd told himself before a strange place. Chloe, he said, yeah. The night in the van, you said whoever had done it would come back and anyone who helped you would become a target. He paused. Did you mean that, or were you trying to get me to leave for my own good? A silence, longer than her usual pauses. Both, she said finally. It was both. They would have come back and you were in danger. And I was also, she stopped, started again. I'd been in that van for 3 days. I'd been thinking about how someone finding me would get hurt because of me. So when you showed up, I wanted you to leave because it was safer for you and also because I couldn't carry being responsible for another person getting hurt. She paused. That's the honest version. Okay, Ethan said. You stayed anyway. Yeah, I'm glad you did. She said it simply without performance, just as a true thing. I want you to know that, not as a thank you, I've said that and it's not sufficient anyway. Just as a fact. I'm glad you stayed. Ethan held the phone and didn't say anything for a moment. I am too, he said. After he hung up, he went back to the shovelhead and worked until Dell came back from wherever he'd been all afternoon. And Dell walked in and looked at the progress and said, "You've been at the primary drive. Found what I thought I'd find. The clutch hub is shot." Dell crouched down and looked. Yeah. He stood back up. "You'll need to order the hub and the friction plates both." "Already ordered. Comes Thursday." Dell looked at him, then at the bike, then back at him. "How long have you been here today?" Ethan thought about it. "I'm not sure." "Did you eat?" Ethan was quiet. "Marcus called me," Dell said, and his voice had the specific quality it got when he was saying something that was actually about something else. "Said to make sure you eat and don't work yourself into a hole when something stresses you out." "I'm not stressed out. You've been in here since 7 this morning. It's 4:30. Ethan straightened, looked at the light outside, then at Dell. "The howl thing bothered me," he said. "I know." Dell reached for his jacket on the wall hook. "Come on, there's a place 2 blocks over that does a soup that will fix most things." "Most things is an overstatement. It's also cold outside and I'm hungry," Dell said. "So we're going." They went. The soup was good. They sat across from each other at a small table, and Dell talked about the shovelhead in the specific way he talked about things he decided were worth talking about. Not effusively, but specifically, and specificity from Dell was its own kind of enthusiasm. "The original owner knew how to ride it," Dell said. "You can tell. The wear patterns are from use, not abuse." "The electrical suggested someone who cared about it," Ethan said. "Whoever let it sit for 14 years should be required to explain themselves." "Life gets complicated." "Life is always complicated. Machines deserve better." Dell dipped his bread. "The restoration is going to be good work for you." Ethan looked at him. "Why for me specifically?" "Because it requires patience," Dell said, "which is what you're working on, and because it'll be done at around the same time you've been here 6 months, which means you'll see what it looks like to take something broken and make it whole again, at roughly the same time you start to have enough data to trust that the ground under you is actually solid." He paused. "That timing is not accidental." Ethan stared at him. "Marcus planned the timing of the shovelhead." Dell ate his soup. Marcus suggested to Porter that his wife's cousin might consider having the bike restored and that the Reno shop was the right place for it. Dell was completely unrepentant, and that the timing of bringing it in should be approximately 6 weeks after a certain new mechanic had settled in enough to take on a complex project. Ethan sat with that, the deliberateness of it, the specific care involved in engineering, not a rescue, but a sequence, something that would require him to stay, require him to grow, deliver a result he could see and measure. "He does that," Dell said. "He finds what a person needs, and he builds circumstances toward it. Not manipulative, he'd never put you somewhere bad, but he pays attention and he acts on what he sees." A pause. "Roy did the same for him. He's been doing it for other people for 30 years. Ethan thought about Roy, dead for 16 years. Thought about the chain of it, Roy to Marcus, to whoever Marcus had done it for, and now to him. "Does it bother you?" Dell asked. Knowing he set it up, Ethan thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "It would bother me if the thing itself wasn't real. Real, but the bike is real. The work is real. The progress is real, yo." He paused. "He created the circumstances. I'm doing the thing." "That's the right way to look at it," Dell said. They finished the soup and walked back to the shop in the cold, and Dell said, 8 months. Ethan looked at him. 8 months is when I'll tell you you're ready to lead the shop when I'm not here. Not ready to run it, ready to lead it. There's a difference I'll explain closer to the time." Dell unlocked the shop door. "Mark it." Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then 8 months. "Mark it," Dell said again and went inside. The call that changed the shape of everything came on a night in late November when the cold had settled into Reno with the intention of staying, and Ethan had started keeping the space heater on in the room above the shop because the alternative was waking up with his hands too stiff to work. It was Marcus. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, "and I want to say it before you hear it from someone else." Ethan sat up. "Okay." The Howell Task Force found the van. They found it in a storage facility outside of Sparks about 40 minutes from you. The phone was still there. A pause. The data on it was significant enough that 3 additional arrests were made in the past 48 hours. Senior-level people. The network is effectively decapitated. Ethan breathed out. That's good. It is good. Marcus paused. Here's what I need you to hear. Your name came up. Not to Howell, he's kept you clean on his end. But within the network, when they started looking at who'd been in that van, they had a security camera at the scrapyard that none of us knew about. It captured the exterior of the yard, not the van, but the approach. Ethan went still. It showed 2 figures leaving the scrapyard at approximately 2:30 in the morning. One of them was clearly Chloe based on the vest. The other was unidentified. The footage has been obtained by the task force and is currently in evidence. Marcus paused. The network's lawyers are trying to get access to it. Howell's team is fighting that. At this moment, you are an unidentified silhouette on a parking lot camera. At this moment, Ethan said. At this moment, Howell believes he can keep the footage suppressed under evidentiary rules, but he wanted me to know, and he wanted you to know. A pause. He also wanted you to know that if it comes to the point where identification becomes a real risk, the task force is prepared to offer you formal protected witness status, which means a completely clean legal identity relocation assistance, the full mechanism. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed in the room above the shop. He looked at the 2 cracks in the ceiling that he'd been following the length of every night. He looked at the water stain in the shape of something that might have been a map. Is it going to get to that point, he said. Howell thinks probably not. He thinks the suppression holds in the network is damaged enough that individual retaliation against an unidentified silhouette is not a priority. A pause. But probably not is not definitely not. And I wanted you to know. Ethan was quiet. Ethan. Marcus's voice was even. Whatever happens, you don't face it alone. That's not how this works anymore. You understand? Yeah, Ethan said. I understand. Good. A pause. How's the shovelhead? The question was so sudden and so grounded that Ethan almost lost his grip on the other part of the conversation. Almost. Clutch hub came Thursday. I've been fitting it today. Dell says you've been making good progress. Dell says I'll be fast enough in a month. Dell said 8 months on the leadership timeline, Marcus said, and Ethan could hear the satisfaction in it, the particular satisfaction of someone watching a sequence unfold the way he'd seen it would. He's never moved that timeline for anyone. I know, Ethan said. Get some sleep, Marcus said. The situation is being handled. You did your part the night it started. Let other people do theirs. After he hung up, Ethan stayed on the edge of the bed. I thought about the camera he hadn't known was there. The silhouette on a parking lot monitor, 2 figures, one with a cuff chain, catching the light moving away from a scrapyard at 2:30 in the morning. The image of the decision he'd made without consciously making it caught on tape. He thought about what Sandra had said, slowly, consistently, with evidence. He looked around the room, the duffel bag that had become an actual organized space. The books lined up on the floor next to the bed because there was no shelf and he hadn't gotten around to building one. The compression wrap for his shoulder hanging on the hook by the door barely needed now. I thought about the shovel head on the lift downstairs, about the clutch hub he'd fitted today, about the moment, maybe 3 months from now, when he'd kick that bike to life for the first time in 14 years, and it would run clean because he'd done the work right all the way down, no shortcuts, no treating symptoms instead of sources. He lay back. He looked at the ceiling. And for the first time since he'd put his boots on that bed on the first night and waited for the floor to move, he didn't wait for anything. He just closed his eyes and he slept. The shovel head started on a Thursday morning in late February. Not on the first kick, not on the second, on the third, which was exactly what Ethan had expected based on the compression readings and the fact that an engine that hadn't fired in 14 years needed to remember what it was before it committed to doing it again. The third kick, the engine caught, stumbled, caught again, and then settled into a rhythm that was rough for about 40 seconds, while the oil reached every place it needed to reach, and then it smoothed out into the particular sound a healthy shovel head makes, not quiet, never quiet, but even. Purposeful, like something that knows what it is. Dell was standing 3 feet away with his coffee and his arms crossed, and an expression that was as close to moved as Dell Whitmore got in professional settings, which meant one corner of his mouth had done something that technically counted as a movement. Ethan stood beside the bike with his hand on the throttle, feeling the vibration travel up his arm, and he didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that the sound wasn't already saying better. After a minute, he let it idle and stepped back. Dell said, "Lower end sounds clean." "It is clean. Timing's good." I said it twice to make sure. Dell drank his coffee. "How long did the total job take you?" Ethan thought about it. 14 weeks, 2 days. A professional shop would have quoted 16. I know, I wasn't trying to beat the clock. I was trying to do it right. Dell looked at him directly. "You did it right." 3 words from Del Whitmore carried the weight of a paragraph from most people. Ethan received them and nodded once and then reached over and cut the engine because the moment was complete, and he'd learned from Dell that you don't dilute complete moments by extending them. He called Porter. "She's ready," he said. Porter arrived within 40 minutes, which told Ethan he had been watching his phone since he dropped the bike off. Porter walked around it twice without speaking. He crouched at specific points. He put his hand on the tank. He looked at the engine cases and then at the primary cover and then at the wiring that Ethan had run clean and taped correctly and routed the way it was supposed to be routed. Then he stood up and looked at Ethan with an expression that was so full of something that it was difficult to be the recipient of it. "My cousin bought this bike in 1972, Porter said. "He rode it for 19 years. When he passed, his wife kept it because she couldn't let it go, but she didn't know what to do with it. It sat for 14 years. He paused. "He would have loved this." Ethan said nothing. Porter took the keys, threw a leg over the bike, sat on it for a moment before he kicked it. Kicked it twice. On the second kick, it fired immediately. It remembered now. And Porter sat on it in the shop while it ran, and he looked about 10 years younger than he had when he walked in. He looked over at Ethan. "Name your price," he said. "Dell handles the billing." "I know Dell handles the billing. I'm asking what it's worth to you personally separate from the invoice." Ethan looked at him. "Watching it run," he said. "That's what it's worth to me." Porter held gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, like this was the answer he'd expected, and it confirmed something he'd been thinking for a while. He rode it out of the shop and down the block and back, and when he came back in, there were things happening in his face that he was managing with the dignity of a man who had been around long enough to know that some emotions don't need an audience. He shook Ethan's hand. He shook Dell's hand. He left. Dell finished his coffee. "That's what the work is for," he said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Remember that on the days when it's just dirty and difficult." "I will." Dell set his mug down. 8 months is in 3 weeks. Ethan had not forgotten. He'd been carrying the date the way you carry something you don't want to drop, aware of it, always not gripping it so hard it became pressure. "I know," he said. "The conversation we have then is going to change your role here," Dell said. "I want you thinking about that now, not then. What you want it to look like. What you need from me for it to work." He paused. "This isn't me handing you something. This is me asking what you're ready to build." Ethan looked at his hands. The scar lines from the crowbar work were fully healed now. Just texture geography, the record of a night that had redirected everything. "I'm ready," he said. "Alright," he said. Dell looked at him for a long moment. "I know you are," he said. "I wanted you to know that you know it." Marcus came to Reno the following week. Not for business. He came on a Tuesday with no stated purpose and showed up at the shop mid-morning and sat on the same stool he'd sat on the last time. And Ethan continued working for a few minutes while Marcus watched, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything. Eventually, Ethan straightened and wiped his hands. "The shovelhead went home," he said. "Porter called me," Marcus said. He was incoherent in the best possible way. "It was a good project. Dell says it's the best first restoration he's seen in 20 years of watching people attempt them." Ethan looked at him. "Dell said that. Dell said it to me, not to you, because Dell expresses approval to the person who can act on it most productively." Marcus paused. "I'm telling you because you should hear it directly." Ethan set the rag down. "Why are you actually here?" Marcus met his eyes. The footage suppression held. Howell confirmed it 2 days ago. The evidentiary challenge failed, and the footage stays in the task force's possession and off the table for the defense. He paused. "You're clean, completely. There's nothing that points to you, connects to you, or creates risk for you going forward." Ethan breathed out slowly. It's over, Marcus said. The part of it that was a danger to you, it's done. Ethan stood with that for a moment. 8 months of keeping a quiet corner of his attention on the possibility of a silhouette on a screen becoming something more than a silhouette. 8 months of Sandra's steady work of rebuilding the wiring of his nervous system. 8 months of Dell's precision and Porter's gratitude, and Chloe's phone calls, and the shovelhead teaching him what patience actually cost and what it returned. 8 months of staying. Thank you for telling me in person, Ethan said. Some things need to be said in person. Marcus looked at him steadily. How are you the real answer? Ethan thought about the real answer the way he'd been learning to think about it, not the polished version, not the version that protected the listener from the complicated parts, but the actual current reading. Better than I thought possible 8 months ago, he said. Sandra says I'm making real progress on the hypervigilance patterns. Dell says I'm ready for the next level of responsibility in the shop. I sleep well. I eat regular meals. I have, he paused. Something in the list had caught him. I have people, actual people, that I talk to, that call me. He said it with the particular weight of someone naming a thing they'd given up believing they'd have. That's the realest answer. Marcus nodded. Something in his face had the quality it sometimes had when a thing he'd hoped for proved out. Not surprised because he'd believed it would, but the quiet satisfaction of belief confirmed. There's something I want to ask you, Marcus said. Ethan waited. There's a kid, 19 years old. He aged out of the system in Sacramento 6 weeks ago. Someone in the chapter community connected him to me. Marcus paused. He's been sleeping rough. He's good with his hands, worked in a shop in Sacramento before his placement ended. He needs what you needed 8 months ago. He paused again. Dell has said the shop can support another person at the level you were when you came in. The room above the shop is yours, that's not changing. But there's a storage space at the back of the building that could be converted. Ethan looked at him. I'm not asking you to take responsibility for him, Marcus said. I'm asking if you're willing to be present for him the way Dell was present for you. The way you learned how to be present is by being around people who did it without making a performance of it. He held Ethan's gaze. Roy did it for me. I've done it for others. You're further along than you think you are. The shop was quiet around them. Outside, Reno was doing what Reno does in late February, cold and gray, and entirely indifferent to the size of the moments happening inside buildings. Ethan thought about a 20-year-old crouching next to a chain in the dark. He thought about the 3 seconds in which he had not left. He thought about what that not leaving had cost and what it had returned, and the ratio between those two things and the fact that the return was so far beyond the cost that it didn't belong on the same scale. He thought about a kid in Sacramento with good hands and no ground. Yeah, he said, tell me about him. Marcus's expression did the thing it did when something was exactly right. Not a smile, something quieter and more durable than a smile. His name is Danny, Marcus said. He's stubborn and he doesn't trust easily, and he's going to push back on almost everything for the first 3 weeks. Sounds familiar. I thought it might. Marcus paused. He arrives Friday. Danny Reyes arrived on Friday at 2 in the afternoon on a Greyhound bus that pulled into Reno 40 minutes late, and he walked into the shop carrying a backpack with one strap and the specific posture of someone who had learned to make themselves small, enough to avoid being a target, and hadn't yet learned that not every room required it. I was 19. I was lean in the way that people who haven't been eating consistently are lean. He looked at the shop the way Ethan had looked at the room above it on the first day waiting for the floor to move. Dell was in the office. Ethan was at the bench. Danny stopped in the doorway. I'm looking for Dell Whitmore, he said, carefully, like he was ready to be redirected. Dell's in the office, Ethan said. He didn't stop what he was working on. Come in. Don't touch anything on the bench to your left. Those are organized. Danny looked at the bench, then at Ethan. Something in his posture shifted, not relaxed, but recalibrated. He came inside. You're Walker, Danny said. Ethan, he glanced up. Marcus told you about me. He said you ran the shop. Dell runs the shop. I'm the senior mechanic. Ethan set his tool down and turned to face him properly. Marcus told me about you. Sacramento good with your hands. Danny looked at the floor briefly. I'm not as good as he probably made it sound. He said you needed to learn, not that you were finished learning. That's different. Ethan looked at him for a moment. How long since you've eaten? Danny's jaw tightened slightly. The question had caught him. This morning. Dell's going to talk to you for about 30 minutes. After that, we're going to get food. Then I'll show you the space at the back of the building. He paused. It's basic. Basic is fine. I know it is. Ethan held his gaze. Not aggressively, just long enough to communicate something that didn't need words. Go see Dell. Danny went. Ethan turned back to his bench and worked, and he could hear through the office wall the murmur of Dell's voice doing what Dell's voice did. Precise, patient, no wasted words. And he heard the shorter, more guarded responses from Danny. And he thought about how he'd sounded in that first conversation with Dell 8 months ago. The careful calibration of how much to give. The instinct to undersell so the gap between expectation and reality couldn't be used against you. He remembered it exactly. Dell came out 40 minutes later, not 30, because Dell's conversations went as long as they needed to and said, he knows engines better than he thinks he does. The self-assessment is off because nobody's ever told him accurately what he can do. I noticed, Ethan said. He's going to need patience. I have some now. Dell looked at him. You have more than some. He went back to his work. Take him to get food. The soup place, Mom. At the soup place, Danny ate with the focused intensity of someone for whom a real meal was not a background event, and Ethan let him eat without filling the space with a conversation because he remembered what it was like when someone gave you food and then expected you to perform gratitude while still tasting it. When Danny finished, he sat back and looked at Ethan with the assessing quality that people develop when they've spent years reading rooms for safety. Why are you doing this? Danny said. Ethan had known the question was coming. He'd asked the same question in a different place 8 months ago. Because someone did it for me, he said, and someone did it for him before that, and I'm not going to be the place where that stops. Danny looked at him, just like that. It's not just like anything, Ethan said. It cost the people who did it for me. Real cost. Time, attention, resources, patience when I made it difficult to be patient. He paused. I'm telling you that honestly so you understand it's not charity. It's a choice that people made because they understood what it cost someone to not have it. Danny was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his face that he was managing carefully. Marcus said you found a girl chained in a van, Danny said. Yeah. He said you didn't know her, didn't know who she was. Not until she told me, and you stayed anyway. Ethan thought about the third time someone had said those words to him. The first time had been Marcus in the cold Nevada dark. The second had been Chloe on the phone. Now Danny in a soup place in Reno with his backpack under the table and his one intact strap. I stayed, he said, and everything that's happened since started there. He looked at Danny directly. I'm not telling you that to make it a story. I'm telling you because the thing that started it wasn't bravery. It was just not leaving. Just staying put when leaving was easier. He paused. That's available to anyone. Danny held his gaze for a long moment. Then he looked down at the table. Something in his shoulders came down a fraction of an inch. Just a fraction. But Ethan saw it. Okay, Danny said. Okay, Ethan said. They went back to the shop. 3 weeks later, Chloe rode into Reno on a Saturday and came into the shop without calling first, which she'd started doing around month 3, and which Ethan had stopped being surprised by around month 4. She looked at Danny, who was learning the electrical system on a customer's touring bike under Dell's direction, and she looked at Ethan and she raised an eyebrow. He arrived 3 weeks ago, Ethan said. How's he doing? He's stubborn and doesn't trust easily and pushed back on almost everything for the first 3 weeks. Something moved in her face. Marcus? Marcus. She watched Danny work for a moment. He was focused, the same quality of focus Ethan had recognized in himself, the kind that comes from finding something you can actually be good at and not wanting to waste the chance. He's going to be okay, Chloe said. Not as a prediction, as a read. Yeah, Ethan said. He is. She turned to him. There was something she was carrying. He'd learned to read the specific quality of when Chloe was carrying something she hadn't said yet. What? He said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my father is doing a thing next month. An annual run, about 400 people, multiple chapters. It ends at a campground outside of Reno. She paused. He wants you there. Not as someone being honored, not as a guest, as part of it. Someone who belongs there. Ethan looked at her. There's a difference. A significant one. Guests get introduced. People who belong there just show up. She held his gaze. He's not asking you to join anything or commit to anything. He's saying that when 400 people gather in a field outside Reno next month, one of the people in that field should be you. Ethan thought about 400 people in a field. He thought about the version of himself 8 months ago that would have found 16 reasons to not be there. He checked that version against his current one. Okay, he said. Chloe looked at him. That was faster than I expected. Sandra says I'm making progress on the reflexive refusal patterns. Sandra is excellent. She paused. One more thing. My father is going to say something at the gathering. About last February. About the scrapyard. She held his gaze. Not to make you into something. Just to tell the truth about what happened, because he thinks the people in that field should know what it looks like when someone does the right thing for no other reason than that it's right. She paused. I wanted you to know in advance, so it doesn't catch you sideways. Ethan looked at his hands for a moment. The scar lines, the geography. Okay, he said again. She studied him. You're not going to argue. Would it change what Marcus says at the gathering? No. Then arguing about it is just noise. Something moved through her face that was the specific quality of genuine surprise rare on Chloe, valuable for that reason. 8 months ago, she said, you would have argued for 45 minutes. 8 months ago, I was calibrated to a different reality. He looked at her. Sandra's words. But they're right. Chloe was quiet. The shop was full of the sounds of Dell and Danny working on the other side of the building tools, and the occasional precise correction from Dell and Danny's shorter responses that were getting fractionally less guarded each week. I owe you something, Chloe said. Ethan looked at her. No, you don't. Not the chain, not the night. She was serious. Something else. Something I've been thinking about for 8 months and haven't said. She held his gaze. That night in the van, I was at the point where I was starting to make my peace with the fact that nobody was coming. 3 days is a long time to be in a chain. I'd run the math and the math wasn't good. She paused. And then you showed up. With your lighter and your $17 and your one crowbar that you found in a scrapyard at 2 in the morning. And you were so matter-of-fact about it, like helping me wasn't a remarkable thing. Like it was just the next thing that needed doing. Her voice was even, and she was keeping it even on purpose. That changed something in me. Not just about being rescued, about what people are capable of, about what's possible when someone just refuses to do the easy thing. Ethan said nothing for a moment. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, she said. I know. He looked at her. It changed something in me too. Everything since that night has been different because of it. I can't separate who I'm becoming from the 2 seconds where I didn't leave. He paused. We both got something out of that van. She held his gaze. Then she said simply, yeah, we did. The gathering happened on a Saturday in March on a flat stretch of land outside Reno, where the winter had finished its business and the air had the particular quality of something that had decided to stop being difficult. 412 people by Ethan's count. He'd arrived with Dell and Danny. Danny was still in the stage of being uncertain in large groups of people he didn't know. And Ethan had said simply, stay close to Dell, which Danny had done with the relief of someone given a clear instruction in an unclear situation. Ethan moved through the gathering, the way he'd learned to move through things over the past 8 months, present, not performing. He talked to Porter and Rooster and Decker. He talked to people he'd never met who knew Dell, and to people he'd never met who knew Marcus, and to a few people who knew him without his knowing how, which happened twice, and both times turned out to be people Marcus had spoken to about the Reno shop in the context of recommending work. I was being woven in, he understood. Not dramatically, just gradually. The way belonging actually happens, not in a ceremony, but in a series of small moments that accumulate until one day you look up and realize the accumulation has become something solid. Marcus spoke after the sun had started moving toward the horizon. I didn't use a microphone. His voice carried the way it needed to carry, and the crowd settled into the particular attention that forms around someone who says true things without decoration. He talked about what the gathering meant to him. He talked about Roy, and Ethan heard his own name coming before Marcus said it, knew it was coming, and felt his chest tighten anyway. About a year ago, Marcus said, a 20-year-old kid was sleeping in a scrapyard in Nevada. He had $17 a lighter and nowhere to be. He had no reason to do anything except survive to the next morning. A pause. He heard a sound in a van, and instead of walking away, which was the intelligent choice, the safe choice, the choice that cost him nothing, he stayed. He worked for 20 minutes in the dark with a single crowbar and freed my daughter from a chain she'd been in for 3 days. Marcus's voice was even. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what it would cost him. He did it because it was the next thing that needed doing. The gathering was very quiet. I want to say something about that kid, Marcus said. Not to honor him, he'd be uncomfortable with that word, and he'd be right to be, because what he did wasn't about honor. It was about something simpler and rarer than that. It was about being the kind of person who hears a chain sound in the dark and doesn't walk away. He paused. That kind of person is not common. When you find one, you don't let them disappear back into the world they came from. You make sure they know they're not disappearing anymore. Ethan stood in the field with the sun at a low angle and 400 people around him and felt the weight of every word Marcus had said land exactly where it was aimed. He did not look away. He stood exactly where he was. Chloe appeared beside him. At some point, he hadn't heard her approach. She moved quietly when she chose to, and she stood next to him without saying anything, and that was enough. After people came to him, not in a formal way, just one at a time, naturally the way people approach someone they have heard something true about and want to connect to. He talked to them. He answered questions. He told the story when asked in the simple way it actually happened, not embellished, not reduced, just true. A man in his 60s named Walt, who had been with the club for 28 years and had the kind of face that recorded everything, stood with Ethan for a few minutes near the edge of the gathering. Marcus told me you're running the Reno shop, Walt said. Dell runs it. I'm the senior mechanic. We're training a new person. Dell told me you did the shovel head restoration, 72. Yeah, Walt nodded slowly. My brother had one, 69. I grew up listening to it run. He paused. There's a sound a healthy shovel head makes that nothing else makes. Nothing modern comes close. No, Ethan agreed. It doesn't. Walt looked at him sideways. You love the work? Yeah, that's rarer than the talent. Walt finished whatever he'd been drinking. Marcus made a good call. He usually does, but he makes a particularly good call with people. He stood. You're going to be fine, son, in case nobody said that plainly enough. He walked back into the gathering. Ethan stood at the edge of the field as the light finished its move toward the horizon. Danny was 20 feet away talking to Rooster with the gradually loosening posture of someone who'd been tense for 3 weeks and was starting to discover that loosening didn't mean danger. Dell was across the gathering, talking to someone Ethan didn't recognize, using his hands in the specific way he used them when discussing something mechanical. Marcus was at the center of it all, not because he'd put himself there, but because that was where the gravity of a man like him naturally placed him. Chloe came and stood beside Ethan again. They stood in the field together while the light did what light does at the end of a winter day in Nevada, going gold and then amber, and then the particular color that doesn't have a name, but that every person who has stood in the West at dusk has seen and remembered without being able to describe. What are you thinking? Chloe said. Ethan looked at the gathering, at Dell and Danny and Marcus and Rooster and Porter and Walt and 400 people who had become, in ways that were still revealing themselves, the edges of a world that had his name in it. I thought about a garbage bag and a bus ticket at 18. He thought about $17 in a boot in a crowbar in the dark. He thought about the chain sound that could have been nothing, that could have been an animal or the wind or a piece of machinery settling, and the 2 seconds in which he had not walked away from it. He thought about everything that lived on the other side of those 2 seconds. I'm thinking that Roy would have liked this, he said. Chloe looked at him. Something crossed her face that was full and complicated, and she didn't try to simplify it. Yeah, she said, he would have. The light held for another minute, then it began to go. Ethan Walker, who had spent 2 years moving, because stopping felt like dying, who had $17 and 1 crowbar on the night that changed everything, who had stayed when leaving was easier and found on the other side of that decision. Something he had stopped believing existed, stood in a field outside Reno with people who knew his name and meant it, and he did not wait for the floor to move. He stood on it. He was home.